Okay, so welcome from my side. So yeah, you know why I'm here. The guilty person sits on that side. So my name is Olli Kuivalainen. I'm from Finland. Just moved back in August to Finland from the UK. I have worked in academia for quite many years. Before I was working in one of the big Finnish multinational in the forest industry sector for a few years, but in the consultancy division. Although they mostly produce pulp and paper and what other things are good at, so forest industry goods. Over the years, as somebody has said, I've lived in France for 7 months in the past, but down in the Midi, but as well in the UK a number of the times, as well as in the North America in the past as well. But very nice to be here in Paris. It's always nice. So what I'm going to do, I have some of the things stem straight from the research, but I tried to bring some examples of the decision making of the SMEs when they consider the international markets. And maybe the idea to give you some examples, most of them seem to be very experienced or in these kind of things, so I might give some ideas how to look at these things, but happy to hear your ideas as well. And say if I speak too quickly or something, and if you have any comments, we can do that as well in the middle. But first I thought I could start briefly just thinking, but if we think of the SMEs, so one thing we all know that they are by default, they are small. And that means that smallness may have an effect on their decision making. The other thing, of course, that you often talk about the age of the company. And now, those who've been here in these meetings before have heard presentations about born globals and international ventures, and there's been rather trendy domain in academia as well, looking at the firms who very early internationalize to number the foreign markets. So within the few years of their foundation. And that's kind of one track as well, that if the company is new, it kind of suffers not just the liability of smallness, but liability of newness as well. And all these companies, if you interact for the first time, they suffer, of course, liability of the foreigners as well. So we have different kind of starting points for the small firms when they think about internationalization. And that's one thing. We have similar decisions they need to make, but because of their starting position, they might have a different expertise, different networks, different context, and some of the challenges they say might be a bit different for the company. If it's a new young company becoming international, of course, a bigger one, you have some kind of legitimacy already because you have operated in the home market as a big company for years. And if we think about the small firms and initial entry, of course, that means that you may not have the expertise, and then you recruit a consultant or experienced manager to come into the company and give you that kind of knowledge how to do these kind of things. But often still many firms don't systematically plan when they think about internationalization. So we do have evidence that many firms internationals, because you have done the research, Florence, about these triggers, and we have proactive and reactive motives of becoming international. And that, of course, means that sometimes we just get an email or phone call or meet somebody somewhere who would ask him, would we be able to deliver for that company? And then one of the things here would be, of course, that we have to make the decision, are we going to serve that customer? Are we going to enter that market? Are we not going to do it? So this is, of course, the first decision, this kind of go, no-go decision. And what we know from the research, I have a good friend who's Canadian, they did research in the UK, that actually many of these so-called unsolicited export orders in the English language, I'm not sure what's the French term for that, but those are the ones you don't proactively plan, actually not that profitable. But if you are a small, young firm, we often take these because we need to sell to survive. So we are thinking all kind of opportunity. We are kind of shooting with the shotgun and taking every customer possible we have. Doesn't matter if you're kind of globally oriented, does it come from the other country or other country. But then that's a certain type of group of SMEs. Some other group are very cautious. Internationalization, it means risk. and then you may just enter, if you are a French-speaking company in France, you might enter Belgium or Quebec or something. So Wallonie or Quebec, because you feel it, because you know the language, it's easier for you, even the culture might be a bit different, or actually a lot of difference if you think of the Quebecois, I think. So clearly, we have different type of SMEs making the decisions, but often the decisions are quite the same. And even the large firms make this decision about the new markets and the entry modes. But the industries might be quite different. And of course, decisions have consequences. And this is just a quotation for one of the kind of studies we were conducting with the Finnish SMEs. And they were this company, just the manager saying, and they did enter the US market with their own sales subsidiary and lost a lot of money. And of course, that's one of the things here that sometimes the decision is the wrong decision, is the fatal for the small company. Bigger companies can afford bigger losses, but the small companies do not. And that, of course, means that it is quite similar for us to think, how do we make the decisions if we are managers for SMEs, think about the internationalization. The biggest decisions, this is from actually Lake Jim Bell, it was a Northern Irishman, actually was my external examiner for my PhD. And this is just, I don't know, can you see it? It's a bit too small text, but this is just about the chain of decisions, and I just show it as a background. But clearly the first decision is this kind of go, no-go decision. And we either do it in proactive manner, so we are searching for foreign customers. And of course, if you are this kind of niche producer, you may have a limited handful number of the customers in your home market. And then these kind of firms would become these kind of born global or international ventures with international earlier. Sometimes it's a necessity because you don't have enough customers in the home market. Whereas if you are a French company, Hexagon, clearly if you serve those customers here in French market, you have plenty of customers already. So there are different starting points here. But then the question would be which export markets? And here as well, if you read the textbook, we have different options. Often there is kind of this non-systematic approach or systematic approach. A non-systematic would be this kind of that somebody calls you and asks you, can you deliver? And then, of course, would be the point that do you do your homework, your due diligence, and research the market, or you do entrepreneurial judgment and say, okay, we have some extra capacity, I will sell you this. But other option would be that you realize your limited resources, you should try to find the customers to whom you create more value and who are most willing to purchase. And that would be, of course, the very systematic approach. And then you might be looking at the whole globe, of course, and start to think about what are the criteria which you think would explain if there are customers who are willing to purchase from you. There's one Finnish company who was doing, we did cooperation, we were selling this kind of 3D software for architects planning for steel constructions. And then what we were discussing with them was that what are the criteria they would be looking at that where's the market? What are the kind of criteria which show what would be the market potential like? And you think about this example, I don't know anyone look at anything but the architectural design or planning and 3D construction, as well as steel structures. They were kind of brainstorming what are the criteria. And one criteria was that the planning permissions for skyscrapers, because skyscrapers need steel structures. And then there was one about the consumption of steel, and they were looking at where actually are the architectural designers located which actually would purchase this. So you try to look at what are the criteria which would tell you where is the market, how big the market is. And that, of course, would be the more systematic approach. Then the other question here would be these two big decisions here would be which market entry strategy. What is the kind of operational mode you enter the market with? And are these single decision or two decision in case of small firms, We do know that most of the small firms use exporting. Probably one reason for this is because they don't have the resources to establish the manufacturing plant or sales subsidiary which they own themselves. Often you even do with the agent or distributor. And partially it's because of resource constraint and limitation. But partially it might be because that you don't know nothing else. And lots of these things are path dependent. So if you know a certain mode, you might use that because you gain experience with that mode earlier, if you have done that in your former job or if you have done exporting in the other markets. Or it may be that you have biases about the other modes. And sometimes companies do follow a certain mode because they think that's much better, or they have had a bad experience in other market about a certain other mode, for example. And every decision makers, everyone might have a bias in that sense. But often these decisions are the core ones, and make or break decisions. And of course, they're all kind of entry barriers. In some countries, you might have to operate a certain mode because the local regulatory environment dictates you to use the mode. And of course, we know mainland China, in some industry, you have to do the joint venture because the Chinese want to tap into that knowledge pool of the Western companies, for example. So there are a number of the questions. Then, of course, all kind of problems here, which I'm not focusing this talk. We can discuss the problems maybe later if you are keen. But clearly, there are a number of the factors which explain the decision. Some are internal in the company, so very much depends on the resources and capabilities of the manager of the company. And some, of course, are external, which could be the regulatory environment, there could be competition, there could be other things which affect our decision making. But that's an introduction before moving to other things. The one thing I would like to emphasize mostly today on the topic would be this decision-making process, which is to a certain extent an internal factor. So how do we as SME managers make decisions? And it's a bit tricky thing to research, and it's a bit tricky thing to understand, because in many cases, if you look at the academic literature, often we tend to look at the different factors like the product, price, like the different marketing things, competition, all these things would affect directly the decision, that being the market or that being the entry mode, for example. But actually, all these factors, or at least our perception of these factors, affect our decision-making process as well. So, for example, if the product would be very new, if the market would be very uncertain, we don't really know the customer needs, we don't really know who are the competitors because it's a new innovation, then of course we have less tools to make the decision, and it's more hazy and uncertain decision-making process in many cases. Some of you might have heard about these things, about the different decision-making logics like affectation and causation, if you read academic literature. I'm not really a big fan of them, but they are quite intuitively quite, making sense to many people and to me as well. So the affectation would be more that you actually think what you have, what you know, and then you do something. Whereas causation, this is from Sarah Saraswati from 2001 or something like that, and she was saying that the causation is more like we plan, we build our strategy, we define our goals and objectives. And then we're looking at the best market, best customer, best operation mode. Whereas the other one more is what we know, who do we know, if we know somebody in Belgium, if you know somebody in Canada, if you know somebody from Italy, we might try to sell there without thinking it's the best market in a theoretical sense. But that's because we have some expertise about this, or we know somebody who might help us to sell the product in that market. Normally I would say those who do investment planning or even banking, I would say that the bigger the decision, more rational, more systematic, more strategic we might be, or at least try to be, even if we don't know how to do it. And for example, we did this study with the one French company, medium-sized company. I interviewed them first time when I was living in Antibes, and now I interviewed them this year again. And they were really this kind of interested. We went to a born global firm, and they actually said to me that actually, if we only do exporting, the decision-making process isn't that complicated, because we have exporting distributed in some countries, but then we just, like Singapore, we have a guy there, our partner, then if he wants to sell something in Malaysia, he can do it. We can give it a try if there's a potential, because we don't lose too much if it doesn't work out. And that's in South Africa's term, that term is so-called affordable loss. So the decision-making process may not be that rational if we feel as a managers that we can afford to lose that investment. But the bigger the investment, more rational decision-making normally looks like. And I assume that would be the case in small firms as well, even though larger firms are probably more rational, partially because they're large, because the decision-making can't be done by the single person, and then you might have the number of the offices, and you need to delegate. And when you delegate, you tend to become more bureaucratic. You have to be more kind of, if I wouldn't like to say strategic, but often you are, because you have to justify that decision for other people. But if you're a single entrepreneur, you don't. And that gives you flexibility, but that often means that you skip number of stages in the decision-making process. If we talk about the different decision-making process, okay, I had one idea. I'm not going to talk this, but when you think of the small firms, this is just a reminder that often it starts with opportunity. So this is that we get the opportunity, either we build that opportunity, new innovation, new product, which gives opportunity to sell it to elsewhere, or it may be this kind of reactive opportunity. Somebody calls us and say that, I want to purchase this. Would you be able to deliver? But this is the other part, which probably you'll be looking at. International opportunity is often defined as a kind of opportunity to sell something to a new market or serve the new market in that sense. I had one example here, just that I thought we could brainstorm a bit. This is just actually a company I read from the newspaper rather recently, called Kindo, a British startup. And they are this kind of the closed, cloud-based social media platform, in the sense that this kind of black and white picture showing that you have older relatives. And the idea here would be the product innovation is that you could keep your family history alive. You could store, like your grandparents could, digitalize their pictures, their stories, and then you could share that with your grandchildren and etc. And it's the application in, Google Play and elsewhere. And just in this newspaper article, the founders said that they got the idea for this opportunity because they lost some of their family members. They realized that there isn't any kind of documentary of their existence available out there. And then they thought this might be a product. And then, of course, the question, if that comes to your mind, or you have another type of innovation, either it comes from your own, like it might come from your existing customers, of course, then the question for the internationalization is that, does this innovation has international opportunities? Are there customers who would be keen to pay money from that thing? And I run this case this year with my Manchester students last spring. And most of them actually did say, no, I don't think this is a good idea. And I had like Latin American girls did say, okay, I could do it, but most of the others didn't think about that. And parts, of course, they were all still young. They don't think these kind of things. And of course, there's another thing, is age segment. But then the question is, of course, is that, for example, if the technology, are they tech savvy, the older people, if this is for the older people segment, how global that segment is, would this kind of sharing concept fit to the French customers or grandparents' minds or not? And one of the things, of course, that comes to go, no-go decision, back to that, is of course that if there's a single customer abroad who would be willing to do it, it doesn't probably make sense to do that. If it's not this kind of, okay, digital product is easy, but if you would need to serve the market, provide manuals in the local language or sales support in the local language, it's a big investment. So in a way, if you get this kind of opportunity in a reactive manner, then of course we should do the decision making of that opportunity. Even though you would say, no, I would always respond, unfortunately, we can't serve you this time. There's the Finnish company. My colleague in Finland got the phone call at the Finnish small company rather recently, and they were producing this kind of special boots to climb up to the pylons and poles. Like, for example, if you need to fix the telephone line or electricity line, you need special boots to, at least in Finland, you have these wooden poles normally. And they got a phone call from South Africa. Could you serve us with 5,000 pairs of the boots? And then they talked to my colleague, what should we do? But the point is that they didn't have the capacity to produce that. And of course, that means if you take that opportunity, you need to build the capacity. That was like the annual number, the boots they produced in a year. And of course, these are the kind of the questions you might end up dealing with in the decision making. And that's what I did. So one thing is that how can global work, this is from Kuivalainen's work, and I've used that a bit in my work recently, but the starting position, okay, you have this different resource-based position, but the other thing here is the opportunities. Are they worldwide, regional, local opportunities? And the other thing, if you think of your research-based as an SME manager, would be that to serve that opportunity, do we have to be based, located, provide support worldwide, or can we do it from locally, like exporting-based business from here, or like digital business, or do we have to have the regional presence to tap into that opportunity? And of course, if your opportunity would be local, then you would stick in France. But that's something you should analyze. But moving to the decision making bit more. So this is a bit like I think spent like more than half of my time, but that was kind of hopefully getting your brains going. But the SMEs and decision making international settings. So some of the pointers here would be that, is it unplanned or planned decision? And of course, my advice would be that it should be planned. And even if origin is a reactive and unplanned, you should make it planned. But then the other thing is that we tend to be very path dependent, partially because we have all these biases. So we think that for the French company, which go to Spain or which go to Belgium or something else, because we think that they are similar as the customers. We think we know something about them. Even this might be a problem. In Finland, the closest bigger market would be Sweden, which you think it's okay. Russia is the other thing, but we don't have to maybe talk about that. But many Finnish companies, because Finland is a bilingual country, so office languages are Finnish and Swedish in Finland. And everybody has to learn the other language school as well. So you kind of know the language, but the point is a bit like the Belgium and France in that sense. Actually, there might be different local peculiarities, but we think it's a similar thing. We don't do our homework. And many Finnish, Swedish mergers suffered very much because when they merge the companies together, they don't think you have to do some kind of training, education. And decision-making between the Finnish and Swedish business culture is quite different. The Swedes drink coffee and want to get the consensus, where the Finns, I don't know, because of history, there's a boss who makes the decision. Although it's not that hierarchical in the sense, but we do, of course, have different behavior. But we have the biases, and the one thing which is the problem here, which probably it's very problematic for the small firm is the time, because we have the pressure, because we are small, we need to make money to survive. We think we have to make decisions quickly. We have to get the customers quickly. And sometimes, of course, it may be that if you are small, you have the innovation, because we tend to think the SMEs are more innovative than the big firms. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, of course. But in many cases, if the market is new, there's no big players yet, because big companies want to make big money and they only serve big opportunities. So the point, of course, one is that there's, of course, time that you need to make that money quickly to survive, but in a way that there's opportunity, window of opportunity there, because the market is not yet developed and you're actually able to serve the market because nobody else served that market. So the time pressures are here, but at the same time, limited resources. I have a colleague who says that what's the best way for the small company to become international, and they're kind of three-letter word for this, and he's saying it's multinational enterprise. So you should partner with the multinational enterprise to become successfully international in a number of the markets at the same time. Only problem for this, of course, that many multinationals don't want to partner with you because you are small, unknown, and they don't think you are good enough. Or they can... so, of course, we often would like to do it. And who was the one who was saying, do you want to partner in this kind of partnership thing? Cooperation with the other companies, international. Yeah. So, of course, this is what the small firms want. But can they do it? It's the other thing. Because the other party doesn't want to do it. Yeah. But of course, the clearly thing is that how to gain that legitimacy, and I think that's one of the key. I said, okay, we discussed about the market and entry mode decision, but then the big thing here would be how the small firm gains the legitimacy, which means that you become a trusted player in that market. And how does the firm does it? And there's actually quite big research gap in the even academic literature in this domain. But of course, we do know that some of the tools the companies do it. And one, of course, would be that you partner with the big company, if you can. Sometimes a big company copies your product and kicks you out, of course. Sometimes they purchase you, but that might be part of your strategy, of course, as well. But one thing, of course, would be that you try to find the partner who is legitimate in that market already. Or sometimes you try to find the customer in that market. And I said we talk about the decision about the market, but I wouldn't always think about the market as a geographical market. I would be thinking about who is the key customer. And who is the kind of reference customer you need to gain legitimacy. That the people trust you, that you survive that market. We did cooperate with the company who, unfortunately, they failed, not because of me or my colleagues, but they failed. But many new businesses, of course, do fail. Many SMEs fail. But they had a quite neat response to they wanted to sell this certain software product for big customers. And they asked, if you purchase this, are you there to provide me support in the 5 years' time? And his response was, yes, we are if you purchase from us. But then eventually that wasn't enough and they failed. But clearly there are kind of tricks you can do it. There was one Finnish company who didn't go to the US. Software firms, for software companies, America is the biggest market, of course. But they didn't go there. They went to Asian market. And they were serving telecom operators. So big telcos. How many telcos we have in each country normally? If you think of France, maybe we have like 3-4 big ones, and then you have the virtual operators. So Orange and whoever it is. But there's a handful of the operators you could sell the product to. But they went to talk to these companies and said that we have this product, it will save you that and that much money, and from whom you would like to purchase this. And then they went to distributors, potential distributors in the country. We talked to this company, they would like to purchase this from you, would you like to be our partner? But this company failed as well. Even I think this is actually quite a nice strategy to do it. Unfortunately, they failed because many SMEs do fail. But in but in that sense, of course, there are a number of the things here, and I discussed about this niche already. So often we try to find the market, not maybe the biggest potential market like the circle here, but we try to find what is the kind of the market we can take from that market. And coming back to the decision making as such, so this is just a definition of decision making. We tend to think from the rationality perspective often. We tend to think there are stages in the decision making process. Sometimes the decision is very quick. You do it on the spot. Your decision-making process is nothing to do with stages because you have a single stage go, no-go decision. But of course, we normally would have an idea that we design our goals and objectives, we look for alternatives, we have built the evaluation criteria, we evaluate the alternatives, and then we make the decision, and then we happily serve that customer and market for years to come. But this, of course, may not always happen. But this is originally stemming from the conceptual paper written by John Child and I think his former doctoral student, I don't remember the first name of the Chinese author, but we have done papers reasoning about these kind of different type of decision-making models, modes, or logics. And we did pilot cases with Italian and Finnish SMEs, DM stands for decision-making. So we were looking at the number of the companies which operated already in international markets. We look at the uncertainty aspect very much. We tried to look at uncertainty aspects. So if they operate emerging markets or BRICS markets, which are kind of bigger emerging markets, and then developed markets. And then we asked them the question first that, okay, how do you normally make decisions? And can you describe us the decision-making process? And then, of course, they did tell us about, okay, there are certain steps, what we normally do. And then we asked them to name those different type of markets and how they make that decision about the entry, how they enter those markets. And of course, most of the companies, they're all kind of small and medium-sized firms, they had rather incremental, this kind of, if you look at these four conceptual kind of decision-making modes in Child and She paper we use as a reference, the first one's very this reactive entrepreneurial judgment. You make the decision from the spot. And none of these internationally operating companies said that they did follow this in these markets. And of course, we learn by doing. So decision-making tends to become, as I said, more systematic over the time. Because we learn, but we become bigger as well. We are successful. And then we tend to have more bureaucracy there. But most of them were this kind of so-called incrementalism approach. And there are some people call it as a muddling through. So you have a problem, you make the decision, but in a way that you kind of have, do one decision at the time, but there's certain rationality more than just making the spot. We try to look at alternatives, for example. Then bounded rationally would be something the Americans, Simon and March, look at early 1960s, which we try to do rational. We try to be rational in decision making, but we understand there's our boundaries there. So, and these could maybe relate to that effectuation logic I mentioned before. And then what we have been trying to look at is kind of real options reasoning, which would be more a decision about that we actually have the plan, long-term plan, but we take steps over time that, for example, we enter that market with the joint venture, but if we build already maybe in the contract with the partner, that if the market grows that way, then we purchase the whole company to ourselves and pay that much for that price for that. So we have kind of the plan built in our decision making, what would happen if certain conditions would prevail after a certain amount of time. And then we try to look at, then in our cases, okay, how many companies would be using this kind of real options reasoning, how many would be looking at the more incrementals or bounded rationality. Our findings so far would be that most SMEs would be somewhere here. So some steps, some kind of analytical work done, but and they learn in that. Even if it's very incremental, they learn within that kind of decision-making mode. But some companies actually did use this limited number of the companies, but as said, often it depends on the size of the investment, size of the affordable loss in that decision. How are we doing with the time? Should we finish soon? And one thing that's, if you look at we had already those who've been here before, one thing would be, of course, that is your internalization kind of path or pathway or pattern, is it more this kind of classic, so which I would very like the waterfall market entry mode. So then, of course, you would do one country at a time, start from Belgium, Spain, then you learn by doing, and then you make the decision about entering the new market when you gain more knowledge how to conduct international business. Or if you enter number of the country at the same time. And here the trade-off, there's some evidence that, of course, if you do this, you tend to have more exporting-based strategy because you kind of trade off the risk of entering all these markets with the less committed entry mode, which makes sense. Because if you can't really have resources to have a subsidiary, sales subsidiary in all these markets if you enter them very briefly after your foundation. And of course, there are industrial differences. I had a student, we were looking at the Chile wine market and how Chilean wine producers make decisions about their entry modes. This summer we're doing this research. And we actually found that it wasn't very systematic because the business model was that you go to these trade fairs, you meet the potential buyers for your wine, and then, okay, you make that decision. And often they are big supermarket chains, or we have countries like Finland and Canada where it's actually national monopoly. And so the Finnish Alko, which is a national alcohol chain, store chain, retailer, is a very big buyer because there's only a single company in Finland who purchases alcohol in that sense. So, of course, if you're at a trade fair, if you meet them, it wasn't very difficult decision to decide we could sell you something. So there are industrial, of course, differences, industrial differences for this, for example. If we summarize briefly about the entry mode decisions, so often there are these kind of heuristics in English language, kind of simple rules the managers tend to follow. There clearly are these kind of industry patterns. They might copy, mimic what the other companies do in the same industry. Sometimes it would make sense to do something totally differently, though, but many companies tend to mimic and copy. And clearly, if you're smaller the company you are, there's more kind of this kind of feeling, intuition approach, sometimes very accidental. But sometimes you have this idea, like there's a Finnish company now who moved their headquarters to French Riviera because the founders wanted to enjoy the sun. So there was nothing to do with the French market per se, but as a smaller company, you're able to do these kind of decisions. Decided you skip the Finnish winter and go to the Mediterranean. But of course, the bigger companies can't do it. But we have to understand the smaller companies do and can make these. You don't always go to the most optimal market, but you go to the market which is fine in relation to your goals and objectives, in that sense. And in a way that's probably very something. I don't think I have to go. This is an example just from the mobile industry, but I don't think many of you were in that business. But clearly, of course, that industry difference as well, that this company, of course, we're thinking about mobile game. You have these different platforms where to publish. So of course, if you design your game for the Google platform, it's the Android, it's the Google Play Store. If it's for iPhone or as well, you have the Apple Store, the App Store. the thing here is as well that you can actually launch these country by country bases as well, because you don't have resources to market the game for the whole thing. Because you think what the big game producers do, they put lots of money promotion. Their games is the #1 game, and you see when you scroll the screen. And of course, the small producers only will be there in the front if you are new. And then it actually does make sense. This company was doing that. They want to do German market first because they could be shown, they could spend some limited marketing budget for that market first and then enter maybe, if they're successful, the other markets after this. But maybe I stop here now so we have time for the discussion. I think I spent about half an hour, if not more. But maybe I stop here, and I do have some other slides just in store, but maybe that's a good starting point for the discussion.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.